to Psalms chapter 27, this was read. I don't know if you get the picture of some of the readings that we've been doing recently, but they're purposely chosen because they're exhibiting a state of mind where the songwriter is expressing some problems and some doubts. And it's possible that he was similar to us. Maybe he was going, or seemingly going through some real trials in his life. Notice he mentioned his parents maybe even forsook him, but God never would. We don't know exactly what was going on. There's not much history there in that psalm to tell us what it was that was going on in his life right then. But picture the Jewish people as they were separated from the land that they had been promised. And turn with me to the book of Esther. I mentioned last week that we're going to be talking about the book of Esther for a couple of weeks. This being the second one, and we have a couple more lessons, Lord willing, coming up. But they were living at a time, and we'll set that setting a little bit later, but they were living at a time when they were under tremendous stress because they were outside of the land that God had promised to give them, and they actually inhabited that land, the land of Canaan, for many years under the three great kings that they had, and then under some, in a divided kingdom, under some really mostly bad kings. And then they had been captured and taken away from that land. And the entire book of Esther is set in that period of time. But if you recall in the book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1, I introduced you to one of the characters, and he remains prominent throughout the book. And I've heard it pronounced several different ways, but I believe it's pronounced Ahasuerus. Also Ahasuerus, possibly. But anyway, it says, it came to pass that the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus, doesn't help much, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Last week we talked about him being the king and giving that party, remember? And then we were introduced to his wife, the queen, Vashti. So read with me in first chapter, verse 9, and you see where she is introduced. Queen Vashti also made a feast, this one for the women, in the royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So she lived there in the same palace with him and had the party. Remember how she was an exhibitor of a particular kind of courage that I related to you and we related together last week. So this week we're going to introduce a few more people and talk about some more individuals that are given to us in that book. And I realize you may have studied the book of Esther in detail before and have already run across these. But later on in that first chapter, we have some other people that are listed that I did not read, purposely did not read last week, but this week we'll look at them, at least one of them, more thoroughly. So in chapter 1, verse 13 and 14, we're also listed some of the men that were close to the king. It says the king said to the wise men, remember, he didn't know what to do about what that his wife had rejected his order, and so he called the wise men to him, and this was the introduction of these. And he went to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. Those closest to him being Karshina, Sathar, Admatha, Tarshish, interesting name by the way, because the town was later the same name, Maries, Marcina, and Memucan. He's the only one that I wanted you to make note of. All of these very odd names. I don't know of anybody with any of these names in my that's ever been in my life. The rabbinical language, or the rabbinical literature of the Jews, places Memucan as being the important man that shows up later on in the story that we're talking about, named Haman. So it's possible that that is another name for Haman. Then if you recall, last week we had the setting of the opulence of the palace in which these people lived. Remember how there was marble and gold chalices and all these things. Well, this was the great Persian Empire. And we're introduced through history in the Persian Empire. Ahasuerus would have been King Xerxes, who reigned, according to history, in about 470 BC, 470 BC. And it was during the time of this Jewish captivity. And originally been taken captive, part of them had been taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, taken many of them out of their own land. We read of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those all during the same period of time. And that's when Esther, the book of Esther, was presented to us, the setting for that. So skip over to chapter 2 of Esther. We're going to meet some more people. Esther chapter 2, verse 5. Remember, Shushan was the capital of the Persian Empire, according to the word that is used in the Bible. And in verse 5 it says, in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew. Now he was not by himself either in the citadel or in the entire country. Jews being captured and being taken into the Persian Empire had been scattered throughout the land. But there were several that lived right there. There was a whole community of them living there in Shushan, the capital, the citadel. He is Mordecai. Mordecai, the son of Jair, it tells us, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Remember the tribes of the Jewish people. Benjamin was the youngest of the children and was one of the two favored ones by his father. But now we're long past that period of time. So when it says the son of Benjamin, we're talking about somebody that had come down of generation after generation. Remember the four kings, or the three kings, the three great kings, all lived 40 or reigned 40 years apiece. So we know that the kingdom period was at least 120 years, and then after that there were many other kings. But here's this man, this Jew that's living in the capital of the Persian Empire, and of course it goes through several of the problems. And it tells you in verse 6 what happened there. Kish, it said, had been carried away. This was the tribe again, not the man, but the tribe of Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. These kings, when they captured another area, would generally take away most of the leaders of the captured nation. They would leave some of the ordinary folks there in that captured nation and demand tribute be paid to them. That's how they became rich. He could afford an army to go out and conquer other people. So that was just a common thing that was going on. So the period of time that we're talking about, Mordecai living there in the capital of this Persian Empire, was after the united kingdom of the Jews. After the divided kingdom of the Jews had broken up and been captive. Of course we know that one of the reasons for them to be taken captive is that they were disobedient to God, and God could not tolerate their disobedience, so he punished them. They were not there on vacation. They were there as a punishment for the actions that they had. We call that period of time and the fact of this the diaspora, meaning that they were spread spread among other lands that they were not familiar with. So this was the Jewish diaspora. Next week we're going to bring in Esther, so don't forget, Esther has still not been introduced. But then we come to the evil man in this whole picture. So turn over to chapter 3 and verse 1. And this may be this man Memucan, that's what Jewish scholars believe that he was, but he goes by another name in the book of Esther. And he is introduced here in chapter 3. By the way, this is kind of a mystery as to why he was so high in the king's order of things. But he was, and verse 1 tells us, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So this gives an indication that he probably was one of those princes that we had named before. And again, the Jewish scholars pivot on that one individual. So for some reason, the king, who had absolute authority, promoted Haman. We don't know why. It doesn't indicate that Haman had really done anything particularly good for him to be promoted. But we do know that that's what it was told. Now, we come in this chapter, and almost the entire chapter 3 is important to us here. It's a character study. And the Bible is filled with character studies. And I believe we're to learn from these studies just what kind of people that we need to be by looking at the good character of some of the people, and we can look at the kind of things that we don't want to do by looking at the bad characters of some of these people. And so we have these two protagonists, Mordecai, the good man, and Haman, the bad. So, in verse 2, we carry on the story down through verse 6. All the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king commanded concerning him. But watch this. Now, notice this was in the king's gate. So this palace was a large enclosure. And there were places within the city outside of the gate to the palace. And then there was a large body of buildings within the gates, and there were things that went on, the harem of the women, the palace, and various other areas within this area. And there were gates separating it from the general population of the city. So if you were within the gates there, you were somewhat privileged. And you were expected, of course, to obey the rules. So one of the rules that had been set up was to honor Haman, that had been set up by the king as something special. Watch what it goes on to say in verse 2. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Now, does that remind you of anybody else during this period of time? Of course it does. Daniel would not bow down to the golden image. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not give homage to that king. So we know of other Jews that said, no, that's not right. And remember, it comes from the Old Testament laws. There is one God, we talked about this morning. And he is the one that you should pay homage to. And Mordecai, even though he was in bondage here, even though he was a captured person, even though he was a foreigner in a foreign land, it says that he made it clear that he would not pay homage to this Haman. Now Haman's answer to that is given to us later on. Watch in verse 3. And the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? So Mordecai was familiar enough with some of these people that they would talk to him. He was not necessarily an enemy of all of these individuals. He was what we may see in various places of the Bible, a man that worked the work that he was given to do. Even though he may have been in bondage, he was doing the best that he possibly could under the rules in which he was living. So they would talk to him and said, why don't you do that? In fact, one of the answers would be, isn't it easier just to kind of give in, Mordecai? Isn't it easier just to kind of go with the flow? When in Rome, do as the Romans do, those kinds of comments. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about when we look at the world in which we live today. For a Christian, wouldn't it be easier to just go with the way that the world is? Why would you need to stand out in the world except that you are a Christian and you know that that isn't right? Because we know which direction that the world is going. And they said, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily and he would not listen to them, they were tattletales. Remember that old deal about being a tattletale? You're not supposed to do that. Well, they tattled back to Haman. It says they spoke to him daily. He would not listen to them. They told to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. Notice he made it a point. He could have just kept that a secret. But he made it a point to let them know he was proud of the fact, just like sometimes we need to be proud of the fact that we're Christians. We need to let folks know that we're Christians. It may separate us from the world. It may give us kind of a label that may not be so positive for us, but that's what we are. We're proud to be children of God. And that's what Mordecai was exhibiting. Now watch what happens here in verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down to him nor pay homage, Haman was filled with wrath. Haman hated the fact that he would not, Mordecai wouldn't give in. And so in verse 6 it says, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Well, Haman was kind of a cowardly individual. He had the authority, evidently, to do something right then and do it in a public way. But he said, well, no, I'm not gonna bother him. But instead, he sought to destroy all of the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. So not only did he come to hate Mordecai, because Mordecai wouldn't give in and pay homage to Haman, he hated everybody that was that same way. And brethren, we've got to understand that there are those in the world today that hate all of us just because that we're Christians. Just because we try to stand for what's right in God's sight, rather than being the kind of people that would just kind of go along. We're going to be typically a disliked or a hated group of individuals because people don't like those that set themselves apart. Now that doesn't mean we need to act superior to anybody. We don't need to be bringing it on ourselves, but we do need to make it a point, just like he did, to make it sure, make it clear, yes, he said, I am a Jew. I'm one of those people. And even though you may not have been able to tell for any other reason, because my worship maybe is private, they probably didn't even have a synagogue in this area because there wasn't that public worship, there wasn't enough of those people. We don't know this from history, but we do know that they were a captured people in a foreign land, and that probably they were a community unto themselves, but they weren't necessarily a prominent one. And that's what Haman was disliking about the Jewish people, and especially about Haman himself. Mordecai made it clear who he was. And that's a really good example for us as we live through the day. Well, it goes on to tell us in chapter 3, verse 8, what was happening, or what was going to happen. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people, notice how he put it. He had to what he had to cast a net over all of the Jews at the time. And when people talk about Christians today, they want to do exactly the same thing. They want to cast us in with others, and they want to be able to have a label and say, well, because of this, here's what's going on. Now watch what he says. It's kind of interesting. They're scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples. Remember, when you think about the laws of God, are they bad things? You know, when you think about the Ten Commandments that these people are probably trying to live under, is that a horrible way of people to live? No, of course not. It's honoring God. It's obeying what should be general civil laws. It's a good thing. But he's trying to cast it in such a way to say, well, you don't want to have these kind of people involved. It says the laws are different from all other people's laws, and they don't keep the king's laws. Now, for the most part, they probably did. Aren't we told as Christians to live as best we can according to civil authority? Aren't we told to submit ourselves to civil authority until the point where it becomes in conflict with God's law? So we're law, we should be anyway, law-abiding citizens. If I see my brethren driving down in the car, I expect them to see them driving it just around or under the speed limit. I expect if I see you guys driving, I expect to see you stopping at the stop sign. Believe me, as I drive around the area, I see a lot of people that aren't doing that. Lots of people are going on through red lights and all of that. I don't expect to see any of you guys doing that. And you wouldn't expect to see me doing that, and hopefully you don't. In fact, as you drive by that school near where Norm and Fran live, that's a really interesting place to drive, especially when school's in session. Yikes. You're being watched. Anyway, so he says, if it pleases here's his solution. Verse 9. If it pleases the king, now in other words, he didn't have enough authority or enough courage to take it on himself, but he wants the king to be involved. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they may be destroyed. He didn't want them to just obey the laws. He didn't want them to just be changed people. He wanted to take them totally out of the way. And there, unfortunately, is a hint for us Christians today. Our enemies don't want us to just be over in another location. They don't want us to be just isolated. They want us to be gone. And it says that they may be destroyed, and then he's putting his own money up. Now, by the way, he gets his money from the king. But at any rate, it says that I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work. This is blood money. He's paying them to kill Jews and to bring it into the king's treasury. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you, and to do with them as seems good to you. So he was given the authority to go ahead and carry out his hated desire to get rid of these people. It's amazing how strongly he hated them just because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him as he walked by in the king's gates. Well, we're going to shorten this story because I'm not preaching the story of the book of Esther. I'm telling you about some of the people in the book of Esther. But in chapter 4, verse 1, we see what happened with him. In verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, when Mordecai learned all that had happened, so he learned that this law had been put forward, He tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. Just like we would do if we've ever found out that the government had placed a law against being a Christian. We would cry, we would be concerned about others. And by the way, there are countries where Christians are living under that kind of law right now. Right now, there are other Christians in other lands, and we pray for many of them, that are living under similar laws to what was going on. So he put on, that was his way of showing his grief. So he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out in the midst of the city. Notice he made it public. Sometimes we need to make it public. He made it public. Then skip down to chapter 5. Because there's another grudge, another way that this is playing out. And it becomes very personal to Mordecai. This is not just all the Jews. This is very personal to Mordecai. Verse 5, chapter 9. Chapter 5, verse 9. So Haman had gotten some good things. We won't talk about that. But there were some good blessings for him. And so it says here in verse 9, so Haman went out that day from the palace, and joyful and with glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai, here is that target of hatred that he had. When he saw him in the king's gate, that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. He was on his way home, and when he got home, his wife just built on the fire, as you maybe already know. So just skip down to verse 14. Then his wife Jairus and all his friends said to him, now here's the answer that you have. Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high. That's 75 feet. And in the morning suggest to the king, so again, Haman wasn't strong enough to carry this out himself, suggested to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. They go merrily with the king to the banquet. He had been invited to a banquet. We'll talk about that again next week. And the thing, watch this, the thing pleased him. Of course it pleased him. He wanted to get rid of Mordecai. He wanted to get rid of all of the Jews, and anything that was going to happen, especially a bad thing like that, was very pleasing to him. Now, if you know the story already, you know this happened, and it happened prior to what this was talking about here. Go back to chapter 2, because Mordecai, again, we're talking about this as a character study. Mordecai did something out of his good character earlier in this time frame. So in chapter 2, verse 22, 21, and 23, we have this. You'll read it yourself, but in those two verses, there's an incident related where Mordecai, again, he was in the king's gate, so he would see things happening. And it turns out that two of the king's bodyguards wanted to kill the king. Being the king in those days was a dangerous position. There were prices on the heads of almost any leader of any kind of a country, even in times of no wars going on, but even in peaceful times, the king generally had a problem with just staying alive. And so these two bodyguards were going to kill the king, and Mordecai heard them, and as some of you already know, he went and reported it through his cousin to the king, and the king was saved by Mordecai's good character. And here's the important part. It was written down in the royal journal. Those of you that journalize, this could be helpful to you someday also. But that's what saved Mordecai. Skip back to chapter 6, and it brings this all together. So here was the king really pleased with Haman. Haman was going to get rid of all the Jews, but besides that, he was going to hang Mordecai the next morning. And the king had a restless night. it says in verse 1 of chapter 6, that night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded. Do you read a book when you get up at night and you can't go back to sleep? Read the tax laws. You should write this. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. Now that's also really neat to have somebody else read it for you. So that's what was happening here. And then in verse 2, and it was found written that Mordecai had told the Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on the king. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai?" And of course he was told, the king's servant said, "Nothing has been done for him." And that's really what saved Mordecai. As the story goes on, the thing was totally turned around on Haman, and he lost his battle on the same gallows that he would have killed Mordecai on. But as we look at Mordecai's character, it's very similar to what we need to be as Christians. We need to do the best kind of thing that we can in whatever situation that we're in. He was still a captive in a foreign land when this happened. He could easily have said to himself, "Well, if these guys killed the king, maybe the next one's going to be nicer to us." He could easily have just said, "Oh, it's none of my business. Let him go ahead and kill the king. It'd be interesting to see what happens." He could have gone completely out of character and just let it go. And he didn't. He said, no, I worship a loving God who wants me to do what's right in whatever situation I'm in. And so he put me here in this particular place, and he wants me to report that. And because of that, not only did it save the king's life, it saved his own. The story came out to be a good story. Lord willing, that's the kind of thing that would happen to us when we stay within the character of what God wants us to be as Christians. We're going to turn to the character of Esther in the future and see some really interesting things also with her. But I want to kind of get this one into your minds as we're thinking and reviewing it again. I know many of you have already known this story. Think about it. Put yourself in that kind of a place. You may be in a situation that you feel yourself to be kind of like Mordecai. I don't want to be here. I don't like this. I don't want to have these things happen. And Mordecai made the best of it and followed the creed that he was following. If you want to become a Christian and you haven't yet, we have this invitation that we sing just to invite you to be comfortable in coming to be as part of the Lord's body. If you need the prayers of the congregation, this is a good time for you also. And we'll have a prayer. We're going to stand and sing this song of encouragement.